So here's the scenario. A guy meets a girl, the girl becomes pregnant, gives birth to a child while the guy goes to work. She's on mum duty, bringing the kid to school, then she glances up, he's now looking all chic and chill. Fast forward, the kid grows up and the woman's bank account is looking slimmer than the man's. Caption below the picture, Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. This picture illustrates why Claudia Goldin received the economics prize. My initial reaction was like, oh my, seriously? Media commentators felt the same, not fully grasping the real deal behind the award. As indicated in the message, the award was granted for work on the gender income gap. But it may appear as if this was a scientifically grounded narrative of a radical feminist, riding the current political wave, addressing the issues of patriarchy oppressing women. But on our channel, we don't judge by covers, so we're going deep to figure if men really get paid more than women, see how this is related to the economic stages, and what factors affect the salary disparities. People believe that Claudia wrote one article and poof, got herself a Nobel Prize. Nope, that's not the case. Goldin nailed the prize for a lifetime of work. She's got at least 23 scientific papers under her belt. The first one back in 1977 was about women's part in the labor market. It took her about 50 years studying the women's roles in the economy. This sets Goldin apart from the typical image of a loudmouth feminist.
This is the neighborhood, and you are not welcome.
That's why I need to be here.
Goldin is a serious lady, pushing 80 now, who once got inspired by Gary Becker and his New Home Economics. Becker floated an idea of families as economic players who should be maximizing their gains, so that any family move would be about maxing out the family income. And when your family assets include a fridge, washing machine, or vacuum cleaner, it means less time slaving away at home. So having one spouse buried in the house chores doesn't add up to a family capital. And you bet house chores have always been assumed as a woman's job. Nowadays, unless you are in some of the most wretched places in the world, no one knows the pain of hand-washing sheets and duvet covers. For the pre-tech ladies, the laundry day was a whole mission, impossibly possible. With men, it's plain and simple. We've always been the hunters and fighters, but a woman's role, that's a totally different story. That depends on the historical era and the stage of society. Well, that washing machine wasn't just a piece of tech, but a tool to free up a woman's time, letting her invest in the economy. This take on the family's role in the economy fueled Goldin's research big time. Gary Becker turned light bulbs on in my head that I didn't know existed. Goldin was excited to figure out the ins and outs of how and why women's roles in the job market were changing. To tackle these questions, she had to dive deep into the data, spanning 100 or even 200 years. But here's the first problem: this data didn't exist. The fact is that 19th century stats only recognized a single or widowed woman. Once married, a woman basically went off the radar simply because she supposedly stopped producing goods and services. This topic was mentioned in the book Invisible Women. Nowadays, we've got various interactive reports from the national stat hubs, packed with metrics. But 200 years back, the data was only on paper, missing any real indicators. Get this, Goldin hit up the National Archives, digging for data that might not even exist. She hand-wrote every bit of info she could get from those dusty books on men, women, and their employers over the last couple of centuries. Here's an interesting tidbit. Back in the day, US employers could straight up admit to some seriously offensive questions. Is there discrimination against blacks and Jews? Yeah, there is. Do you fire women when they get married? Yep, we do. Do you hire married women? Who needs them? Today, for responses like that, you might end up facing total cancellation. So, in the midst of her diggings, Goldin came up with some groundbreaking insights. The real deal is that everyone assumed that women's participation in the economy followed a straight line. Back in the 19th century, women got treated like they were lower than low, had no voting rights, were stuck at home, and couldn't just say a word without the husband's green light. Then, when a civilized community with social equality and moral standards came into play, women started enjoying the same rights as men. Nope, Claudia says that's not how it worked. It's much more complicated. In fact, at the start of the 19th century, women were putting in some serious work. Then, with the rise of industrialization, things went south. The irony is that back in the agrarian days, women's part in the economy was pretty much like it is now. One of Goldin's major wins is that she shattered the myth that women's participation in the labor market was a straight line, and she pulled off these results thanks to her hard work. Back then, if the population census had a woman marked as a wife, that was it. She was no longer part of the economy. In today's language, being a wife would mean a woman who didn't have a job. In reality, that wasn't the case. Women were actively involved in their husbands' businesses, even if the stats didn't point it out. How did Claudia Goldin prove it if a married woman's job wasn't reflected anywhere in the records? It took some creative moves. Remember, singles and widows still had their names in the stats, so Goldin decided to find out what women did after the death of their husbands. Once again, she got into the nitty-gritty, comparing Philadelphia's directories from 1796 with the earlier data. It turned out that after the husband's death, women kept on grinding in their businesses. And we're not just talking about the regular shops, but also non-women's businesses like shoemaking and tinsmithing. This work was called work in the hidden market. If someone can keep the business going after their partner exits the scene, it means they've got all the skills, which is basically saying they were working together as partners. But this work didn't make it into the stats. After all, the column for married women just said, wife. And you bet, if there were women making shoes, there were even more jobs like seamstresses, innkeepers, or laundresses. Digging into 12,000 Philadelphia households run by women, Goldin dug up some fresh, never-before-seen data. She uncovered a third of women previously invisible in the labor market. While the state census claimed only 19% of women were working, Goldin argues it's more like 26%. Even more surprising, before industrialization kicked in, women had a bigger slice of the economic pie. That busts another myth that says where the GDP is higher, women have a bigger role in the economy. It's not that simple, it all depends on the specific time period and conditions. Next up, we're tackling why only 1 in 10 women was working by the start of the 20th century. But what about pay equity? Both men and women could be putting in 8 hours, but they're getting different paychecks. We're diving into some real intricate stuff here. Check it out. Even though women were misrepresented in the labor market during the industrial era, their paychecks were on the upswing. First between 1820 and 1850, and then from 1890 to 1930. What's the point here? The wage gap closed up before anyone started pushing for equal pay between the sexes. By the way, it strikes me as appropriate to call this a wage gap between the sexes rather than genders, or it seems like the Nobel Committee is claiming that there are only 2 genders because they talk about men and women here. So what caused this levelling off when there weren't any groups fighting for the disadvantaged or underprivileged? It's plain and simple. The answer was in production standards. When factories started popping up, paychecks were based on how much you produced. You pump out 100 parts, you get 100 cents, no matter your gender. Finally a bit of common sense. Men are just naturally stronger and more efficient. No inequality there. Well, not exactly. We're talking about a specific time here, the early 20th century, and about a specific place, the USA. Your country might not be at the same stage now. And let's not sugarcoat it, there was plenty of discrimination going on. First off, there was gender segregation on the production line. Women were mostly employed in the textile, clothing, footwear, canning and tobacco industries, where the pay was initially low and climbing the ladder was not entirely possible. However, it can't be said that discrimination just happened out of thin air. It's more like it was passed down the line. The deal is, most women back then had poor education, and that meant they were stuck with basic jobs. But that isn't the whole story. There were other layers of discrimination integrated into the social norms. Remember how I mentioned that back in the agrarian times, more women were playing a part in the economy compared to the industrial era? Now, things got interesting when Goldin started breaking down different groups of married and single women. This breakdown reveals what wasn't obvious before. By 1900, married women's work rates had fallen to 9%. That's a drop of around 41% over a century. Meanwhile, single ladies were getting much higher employment rates. You're wondering why, right? It all boils down to that same social dogma that a married woman's place is in the kitchen, cooking some pot roast. Back in the agrarian days, everyone stayed at home. The whole economy revolved around households back then, and no one had to go to a factory. A woman had her traditional roles, raising kids, keeping the house in order, feeding the husband. And there were those crazy women, and there were plenty of them, who could juggle all those duties plus helping their man in business or doing some sewing. The agricultural era was a time of golden opportunity. But then industrialization starts, and suddenly working from home turns into working on a factory floor. For dudes, heading out to work is no biggie, but for a woman, it's like a social no-no. Who is to be the housewife then? Times change, but old habits die hard. Plus, with the rise of industrialization, garment factories take over from small-time seamstresses, and old taverns are shoved out by hotels. The need for handwork from home is fading fast. It's a wacky situation. You need to leave the house to work, but somehow it's not very ladylike for a woman to step out. Hold up, if she's single, sure, let her work, but not for too long, until she ties the knot. Then she better get back to the kitchen. That's why they often get hired for basic jobs like textile factories, where it's easy to find replacements. After all, a single woman is gonna eventually get married, and the old-time social norm once again kicks in, and the woman stays at home. Sure, if she's up for it, she can work from home, but there's no internet and Instagram yet, so she could sell her knitted scarves to the neighbors? Tough times, you know. Watch my hands here. There was no wage discrimination because the pay was directly tied to how productive the worker was. As you might have noticed, the paycheck doubled compared to the agrarian days, where things were kinda rough. But on the flip side, once married, a woman was done with the factory work, so her final move was to become a housewife, period. Turns out the oppression by the patriarchy is just a catchphrase. The real picture comprises multiple factors such as time, the stage of society's development, wage discrimination, employment issues, and other reasons. Now, brace yourself for this paradox. With further progress comes further wage discrimination. Somewhere before 40, a vicious circle appeared, and at the heart of it, there was... well, nothing in particular. There's a whole bunch of factors, and the era of white-collar work is about to start. With the first white-collar wave, the way the office work is paid is changing. Instead of paying for the number of parts, it's all about the contract now. You can no longer even measure how productive your employee is. Little did they know that we'd later come up with all sorts of KPIs. All of a sudden, it turns out that bosses reward those who put in extra time at the company and skip taking months or even years of vacation. They figure women are about to get married, so why bother investing in them? Women have the same expectations, getting married soon, so why bother investing in education? Specifically in the USA, in the first half of the 20th century, the state decided to drop a ban on married women. Working in offices and teaching was not allowed for them. Yeah, it might seem odd to us now, but in 1942, 87% of schools had a ban on hiring married women, and 70% on keeping them on the payroll. In the 30s, up to 40% of companies surveyed said they wouldn't hire a married woman. All of this is happening while office work is pulling in more and more women because, let's be real, the working conditions are better and the pay is higher than in the factories, so the office scene is getting more women-dominated. I know, sounds like a bunch of mixed signals, but it all depends on how many pieces of the puzzle you can keep in the picture. But after 1930, a second wave of white-collar takeover kicked off. The market keeps on growing, employers need more hands. The state lifts the ban on working for married women. At the same time, women's attitudes change. Some mums, after raising a kid, plan to keep their careers going. What's making this shift? Well, you remember what? And when your family assets include a fridge, washing machine, or vacuum cleaner, it means less time slaving away at home. So having one spouse buried in the house chores doesn't add up to a family capital. All these factors add up, and since 1940, married women who were once pushed to the sidelines start working again and its number shoots up. The overall employment rate is skyrocketing. Here comes another factor. In the 40s and 50s, companies rolled out part-time work, a not-so-common concept back then, though the pay gap in the 40s and 50s doesn't change much. Well, after raising kids, women in their 40s and 50s start returning to the office, while initially in their 20s, women didn't plan on working later in life. They were pioneers in that, taking on the years-long break to raise kids, treating it like a one-way ticket. So, being young, these women didn't invest much in their skills but opted for routine, low-paying jobs with little to no chances of moving up the ladder. And this turning point was crucial for the next generation, as it changed the daughters' expectations. Expectations mean a lot. What you expect for the future shapes what you do in the present to meet those expectations. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. From 1790 onwards, daughters looked up to their mums who were less and less involved in the economy, hitting rock bottom in 1900. Getting married back then meant a 91% chance of waving goodbye to work. In the 1910s, daughters knew that their mums worked in manufacturing but left after having a kid. In the 1930s, daughters knew their mums worked in an office but quitted after having a kid. In the 1950s, daughters were seeing mums heading back to the office after raising kids, often doing part-time shifts. In the 1970s, daughters got it. It's okay to work after getting married or having a baby, and they were now ready to invest time and effort in their own education. And it was a sudden and swift change. Goldin cites survey results from 67 and 79. They asked 20-year-old girls whether they planned to be employed at 35. In 1967, only a third said yes. 12 years later, positive responses spiked to 80%. Besides expectations, there was a medical revolution. Birth control pills showed up, boosting women's confidence that a casual encounter at a university dorm wouldn't mess up their life plan. All these trends built up and solidified women's position in the job market. In the 80s, there was a turning point in the wage gap that had been stuck for 100 years, and our society went from a 50% gap to 20%. But what's keeping us from eradicating inequality for good? So, by the present day, we've cut the wage gap by 3 times over 200 years, and now we're looking at a 10 to 15% gap. But what's holding us back from getting to that perfect parity? Goldin did some digging into the current situation, seeing what's happening in the same professions. Turns out the biggest gap is in the business sector. Even among MBA graduates, initially the salary gap wasn't high, but it shot up fast over the years, and at the top-tier salaries, it's downright messy. Female grads get paid disproportionately less. What's causing this injustice? The Parenthood Effect. Yep, the last big barrier to reaching parity is biological. Before, during, and after having a kid, a woman's got to pause her career while a guy keeps climbing the corporate ladder. Over a 10-year career, a woman takes a break for about a year on average. For a guy, it's only about a month and a half. And this data is among MBA graduates, where the workaholic model is the norm. Turns out those 2 hours of overtime have a massive impact on your income. It's like exponential growth. In 2014, Goldin illustrated the potential of this explanation by looking across industries and occupations with different job demands. The gender earnings gap is larger in occupations with more time pressure, contact with others, interpersonal relationships, and freedom to take decisions. The degree of worker substitutability is low in these occupations. But in places where the pay model is factory, like, per hour, the gap is tiny. So in pharmaceuticals, when face-to-face communication faded away, automation took over. All the data was provided to the employees electronically. This resulted in the pay gap shrinking from 40% to 15%, as there's little room for discrimination if you're getting paid on an hourly basis. Right now, there aren't many barriers left for us to achieve total equality. The last hurdle was set up by Mother Nature herself. Raising a child falls heavily on a woman's plate. If she plans to work during this period, she can't go all in on her job, hence the income difference. Women receive a wage penalty for demanding a job flexible enough to be the on-call parent. Men, on the other hand, receive a premium for being flexible enough to be the on-call employee, i.e. constantly available to meet the needs of an employer and/or a client. Thanks to Goldin's archaeological digs, we've learned how women's standing in the job market changed. Discrimination took different forms at different times, and access to education alone didn't always solve the problem. It all depends on a bunch of factors. It's kind of ironic that in a time when everyone's shouting about patriarchy, oppression, equality between men and women is at its peak. Seems like it'll only get better, but probably a whole lot louder. We pay a special gratitude to our supporters on Patreon. You know who to share this video with, and I'm the researcher.